If you've spent any significant amount of time in the Super Sentai fandom, there's two fun facts that you've probably heard. They've more or less become common knowledge among tokusatsu fans at this point. The first goes a little like this. When the Super Sentai series first started, the first team in the franchise wasn't actually Go Ranger, as we now know it to be, but rather Battle Fever J. See, according to this claim, the Super in the Super Sentai title refers to the giant robots. Go Ranger and Jacker didn't have robots, so they were just plain Sentai series. It was not until 1995 that Toei decided to honor Go Ranger's 20th anniversary by retroactively declaring it the first Super Sentai, and Jacker the second. The other claim you may have heard is tangentially related. It says that actually there is a third, lost Sentai series between Go Ranger and Jacker, a lesser-known show named Ninja Captor. According to some, this was considered the second Sentai series, but was forgotten when its two peers were added to the Super Sentai lineup. But the question of the day is, are either of these claims actually true? No, not really. No. Like, in the interest of not clickbaiting you, both claims are indeed misconceptions. There is a bit of nuance to them, however, and a very interesting history to how they might have come to be. And that is what we're going to be exploring today. Before we go any further, I would like to credit Reddit user 11Sarge, who made a very detailed post researching these very misconceptions, which is what brought them to our attention. 11Sarge gave their blessing for us to use said post as the basis for this video. So, I said that Battle Fever was not, originally, the first Super Sentai, that statement was false. You may have thought, no, surely that's wrong, right? Just look at the Turbo Ranger premiere. That was the very first Super Sentai anniversary crossover, and it plainly states that Battle Fever was the first in the franchise. Now that is true, there was a time when Battle Fever was called the first Super Sentai, but it wasn't originally the first. That's a bit of a confusing statement, so let's go back to the beginning and give a quick recap of early Sentai history. During the 70s, Toei was producing one superhero show after another, many with the involvement of the king of manga himself, Shotaro Ishinomori. These Ishinomori co-productions included two superhero team shows, Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger in 1975 and Jacker Dengekitai in 1977. While Go Ranger proved popular, Jacker didn't fare nearly as well. So Toei decided not to make any more of these team shows. Instead, they focused on partnering with Marvel to create 1978's Spider-Man. This show was wildly successful, largely for the inclusion of a giant robot named Leopardon. This inspired Toei, now without Ishinomori's involvement, to put the two concepts together into Battle Fever J, a team of multicolored superheroes with a giant robot. The giant robot concept would also be incorporated in Battle Fever's successors, Denji Man in 1980 and Sun Vulcan in 1981, at which point the franchise became known as Super Sentai. This is where reality begins to diverge from the misconception. What you'll commonly be told is that Super Sentai only referred to the teams with giant robots, that is to say, from Battle Fever onward. However, looking at magazines and promotional material from the early 80s plainly proves this to be a mistake. As I mentioned, the name Super Sentai was first coined during Sun Vulcan in 1981, and promotional materials from 1981 plainly show that Sun Vulcan was, from the beginning, advertised as the fifth in the franchise, succeeding Go Ranger, Jacker, Battle Fever, and Denji Man. Toei was consistent about this throughout most of the 80s. Take a look at this VHS collection from 1985, titled Super Sentai Graffiti. Each of these tapes was meant to showcase 3 Super Sentai, note the word super is present, and the first tape was, in fact, Go Ranger, Jacker, and Battle Fever. Now look at this promotional material for Flashman, aired in 1986, which celebrates it as the 10th entry in the Super Sentai franchise. Once again, note the repeated usage of the full term, Super Sentai. So, that pretty definitively settles it, right? From the very beginning, the first 2 Super Sentai were considered to be Go Ranger and Jacker, with Battle Fever as the third. By extension, this proves the super did not actually refer to the giant robots, but to the superheroes themselves. Clearly that's not the full story though. How can it be? What about that Turbo Ranger special? I mean, that was the first major crossover between these shows in a televised story, and it says, clear as day in plain Japanese, that the first installment was Battle Fever. Well, this next part is a bit trickier. We do not actually have all of the details, unfortunately, but it all seems to come down to rights issues. As I mentioned earlier, Go Ranger and Jacker were the creations of Shotaro Ishinomori, and by extension they were co-productions between Toei and Ishinomori's own company, Ishimori Pro. However, neither Ishinomori nor Ishimori Pro was involved in the series from Battle Fever onward. Battle Fever through Sun Vulcan were co-produced with Marvel, while every series after was solely the work of Toei. The creator credit for these series was given not to Ishinomori but to this name, which can be pronounced either Saburo Yatsude or Saburo Hatte, and is not a real person but a pseudonym used by Toei staff. So, from what we can gather, and keep in mind this is largely speculative, sometime in the latter half of the 1980s, Toei and Ishimori Pro presumably had a disagreement over whether Ishimori Pro's two series should be lumped in with the rest, which they had no involvement with. To avoid trouble, Toei decided to rebrand Battle Fever as the first entry in the Super Sentai franchise, and no longer use that name for Go Ranger and Jacker. Of course, when you rebrand, you have to make it clear to audiences, so they celebrated Super Sentai's 10th anniversary again in 1988 and 89, this time with Battle Fever as the first. It was during this time period that the Turbo Ranger special was produced. Now, Toei did eventually find a way to work around the division. The Sentai series owned by Ishimori Pro could not be advertised as part of the Super Sentai franchise, but they were similar enough that Toei could get away with lumping them together under an umbrella term, not as a unified franchise but in a broader category of Toei hero shows. To this end, they came up with the label Chōseiki Zen Sentai. They started using this label in mid-1993 during the run of Gosei Sentai Dairanger. And, fun fact, this means that print materials from the start of Dairanger's run advertise it as the 15th series, while materials from the middle of its run advertise it as the 17th, which is kind of amusing. Anyway, photo books released under the name Chōseiki Zen Sentai included an explanation that it was an umbrella term for what was now considered two franchises: the Sentai series, created by Shotaro Ishinomori, and the Super Sentai series, created by Saburo Yatsude. This retroactive change is where we get the assumption that the Super in Super Sentai always referred to the robots. The Chōseiki Zen Sentai label only lasted for about a year and a half. Possibly as a result of Shotaro Ishinomori's diagnosis of malignant lymphoma, Ishimori Pro agreed to give Toei the right to incorporate Go Ranger and Jacker with the rest of the Super Sentai franchise once again. As a result, 1995's O-Ranger was billed as the 20th anniversary celebration of the franchise, with Go Ranger serving as year one. Since then, Go Ranger has consistently been treated as the first Super Sentai once again. Ishimori Pro retains involvement in the franchise, of course, and are credited in all Sentai productions that use Go Ranger and Jacker, as well as all Power Rangers adaptations of said productions. For instance, Ishimori Pro is credited in Power Rangers Super Megaforce. In these cases, Shotaro Ishinomori receives either a special thanks or a co-creator credit alongside Saburo Yatsude. Now, where does this leave Ninja Captor? I mentioned this show earlier, and thankfully it's a much simpler matter to solve. Ninja Captor was a Toei Team Hero show that aired in 1976, during the run of Go Ranger. In the 80s, 2 issues of Keibunsha Encyclopedia, a third-party licensed magazine that covered tokusatsu, listed Ninja Captor among the Super Sentai, specifically as the second. This is seemingly just a mistake on the publisher's part. No publications aside from these 2 issues ever called Ninja Captor a Sentai, and the error likely stems from how similar the show is to the franchise. Ninja Captor does, however, have one notable spot in Sentai history. It was the first superhero team show created by Saburo Yatsude, making it a sort of precursor to Battle Fever, you could say. This is why, despite Ninja Captor not being a Sentai, it did receive an homage in Zenkaiger, the 45th anniversary Sentai series, with the character of Hakaiser being based on Ninja Captor's Fire Captor 7. It's very easy, especially in fandoms for foreign language shows, for second and third hand assumptions and speculation to be elevated to the status of common knowledge. Hopefully, the tangled tale of the first Super Sentai serves as a reminder. You can't always take fandom knowledge for granted. The truth is often far more complex, and sometimes it can even be more fascinating. Thank you so much for watching. As you can probably tell, this is not Cammy speaking. I am Glenn, who you might remember as the radical 90s teen from the Power Rangers video. I am also the co-writer for most of the scripted content on this channel. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to bringing you all more content like this in the future. Peace.